The Valgzeri hunting party moved through the dense forest with practiced silence, their reptilian eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. They had hunted across countless worlds, claiming trophies from weaker species who thought they could resist. But this planet was different. The atmosphere was heavier, the air carried a strange scent, and the silence felt unnatural. There were no panicked footsteps, no desperate creatures fleeing for their lives. The humans should have been running, yet there was no sign of them at all. The lead hunter, Commander Exceltor, raised a fist, signaling his team to halt. His nostrils flared as he inhaled deeply, but the scent of prey was faint, almost as if it had been deliberately masked. He exchanged a glance with his second-in-command, a seasoned warrior who had never failed to bring down his target. "Strange," Zeltor muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "They know we are here." The Valgzeri had studied humans before their arrival. Weak-bodied, slow-moving, and lacking natural weapons. An easy hunt. Their primitive projectile weapons could not match the energy rifles the Valgzeri carried. Yet something was wrong. The city ahead should have been bustling with life, yet it stood in eerie silence, its streets empty, its lights flickering. A trap? No, the humans had no way of knowing they were coming. Zeltor clicked his mandibles in frustration. He had expected to hear screams by now, to see frightened creatures scattering into the night. Instead, there was only an oppressive stillness. He gestured for his team to advance. They moved in formation, their claws clicking softly against the concrete. The city's buildings were old, worn down by time, yet there were signs of recent activity. Doors left open, supplies stacked neatly, as if someone had been preparing for something. The Valgzeri split into small groups, moving through the buildings with their weapons raised. One of the hunters found an abandoned dwelling, a table still set with uneaten food. Another discovered a marketplace, stalls filled with goods, untouched and undisturbed. It was as if the humans had vanished without a fight. But then the first sign of trouble came. A sharp cry rang out through the night, cut short before it could turn into a scream. The Valgzeri spun around, weapons raised, but there was nothing. Their communicator crackled. "Zithran is gone," a panicked voice reported. I turned for a moment, and he was just gone. Zeltor felt a cold dread settle in his chest. This wasn't how hunts were supposed to go. Prey did not take hunters. He activated his communicator. "Regroup at the landing site," he ordered. "Now." But the moment he spoke, the city came alive, not with sound, but with movement. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, shapes darting between buildings too fast to track. A rustling from above made Zeltor snap his head upward, but all he saw was darkness. Then another scream, this one filled with raw terror. The Valgzeri fired blindly into the night, their energy weapons cutting through the air, but hitting nothing. The panic spread. Warriors who had never known fear now trembled as something unseen stalked them from the darkness. Zeltor's mind raced. How was this possible? Humans were not capable of this level of coordination, this kind of tactical ambush. Yet it was happening. The hunters were being hunted. Another body dropped, a Valgzeri warrior dragged into the shadows, his rifle clattering against the pavement. Zeltor barely caught a glimpse, a humanoid figure, low to the ground, moving with unnatural speed. Not running, stalking. His blood turned to ice. These were not panicked creatures fleeing for their lives. These were predators who had been waiting. The realization came too late. A shadow moved at his side, too fast to react, and pain exploded in his side as something sharp and metallic slashed across his armor. He fired wildly, but the attacker was already gone. His vision blurred, his breath quickened. He had underestimated them. They all had. Somewhere in the darkness, a low whisper echoed through the air. It was not in the Valgzeri language, but its meaning was unmistakable. "Run." Zeltor's breathing was heavy as he pressed his back against the cold metal wall of a ruined building, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. His remaining warriors stood close, their weapons trembling in their hands. These were not inexperienced hunters. Each had taken down some of the most fearsome creatures in the galaxy, yet now they were reduced to frightened prey. It made no sense. Humans were weak. That was the conclusion drawn from years of observation. Their bodies were fragile, their senses dull compared to the apex predators of other worlds. Yet here, in this abandoned colony, the Valkyrie were the ones being hunted, and the humans, they were something else entirely. A distant sound made them all tense. A soft rustling, the kind that would have gone unnoticed in any other situation, now felt like the whisper of death itself. Zeltor motioned for silence, his 3 remaining warriors pressing themselves against the structure's wall, listening. The air was thick with tension, their night vision lenses scanning the area. But they saw nothing. The humans were there, watching, waiting. Then a sound from above. Too late. The first warrior was gone before he could scream, pulled upward into the shadows, his weapon clattering uselessly to the ground. The remaining Valkyrie barely had time to react before the second was taken, dragged into the darkness of the ruins, his gurgling cries fading into silence. Zeltor fired blindly into the upper levels of the building, the green energy blasts illuminating the shadows for brief moments, but revealing nothing. Panic clawed at his mind. How? How were the humans doing this? Their species was not known for speed or stealth. Yet here, on their own world, they moved like ghosts, striking with perfect precision, overwhelming a superior force without even revealing themselves. The thought chilled him to his core. The third warrior turned to run, his instinct to flee overriding his training. But before he could take more than a few steps, something shot out from the shadows. A length of wire looped around his throat, yanking him backward. He clawed at it, gasping, his eyes bulging in shock as he was dragged into the darkness. Then there was silence. Only Zeltor remained. His mind raced, instincts screaming for him to run, but he knew it would be useless. The humans weren't chasing them down like frightened animals. They were picking them off one by one, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He tightened his grip on his weapon, forcing himself to think. He was a hunter. He had survived the most dangerous worlds, fought against beasts that could tear through armor with a single swipe. He refused to be defeated by a species that, just hours ago, he had considered weak. His fingers moved to his communicator, but it was dead, jammed by the humans, no doubt. He needed to reach the extraction point, signal the ship manually. He moved cautiously, every step careful, his senses stretched to their limits. The air was heavy, the silence suffocating. A sudden noise to his left made him spin, his weapon raised. But there was nothing. Then, to his right, another sound. They were playing with him, testing his reactions. He fired twice, the green bolts of energy cutting through the air, striking empty space. His heart pounded. They were close. Too close. His mind reeled at the sheer efficiency of their tactics. They had adapted. The moment they realized they were being hunted, they did not run. They became the hunters. What kind of species was this? What kind of prey turned on its predator so effortlessly? His breath quickened, fear creeping into his very bones. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision, and before he could react, pain exploded in his leg. A sharp blade had been driven through the gap in his armor, slicing deep. He roared in pain, spinning wildly, but his attacker had already vanished. He staggered backward, blood dripping onto the ground, his weapon shaking in his grip. Then, finally, he saw them. The humans emerged from the darkness, not running, not charging, but walking. Calm, controlled. Their faces were emotionless, their eyes sharp and calculating. They held no advanced weapons, only simple, efficient tools, blades, ropes, makeshift weapons that should have been no match for the energy rifles of the Valkyrie. Yet, here they stood, victorious. Zeltor's vision blurred as his strength faded. He had never been afraid of death before, but now, staring into the cold, merciless eyes of his hunters, he understood true fear. The humans did not speak. They did not gloat. One of them stepped forward, raising a blade, and Zeltur, for the first time in his life, knew what it meant to be prey. The darkness closed in, and the last thing he heard was a single whispered word: checkmate. The Valkyrie had always believed themselves to be the superior hunters of the galaxy. They had conquered planets, wiped out lesser species, and established their dominance wherever they set foot. But now, in the ruins of what was supposed to be an easy human colony raid, fear gripped their hearts like a venomous parasite. The remaining warriors moved cautiously through the shadows, their weapons raised, their senses stretched to the limit. Every sound, every whisper of wind, sent a jolt of terror through their bodies. They had come here expecting weak creatures, soft, slow, and easy to eliminate. Instead, they had discovered something far worse. The humans were not prey. They were something else entirely, something that no amount of training had prepared them for. Zeltur wiped the sweat from his brow, his breathing ragged. His team had been picked off one by one, disappearing into the darkness without a trace. The humans had done it without sound, without mercy, and without ever showing their faces. It was unnatural. Predators were supposed to strike with force, to roar and intimidate their victims before taking them down. But the humans did not follow those rules. They didn't hunt with brute strength. They hunted with patience, intelligence, and an eerie silence that made Zeltur feel like he was already dead. The remaining Valkyrie warriors clung together, their backs against the broken walls of a ruined building. Their once confident leader, General Kvorn, was now whispering orders with a shaking voice, his usual commanding tone replaced by a barely concealed panic. "Stay together. Move slowly. No unnecessary noise," he muttered, his eyes darting across the darkness, as if expecting death to emerge from it at any moment. A distant clatter made them all freeze. The sound was small, barely audible, but it sent a wave of dread through the group. Kvorn swallowed hard, signaling for them to move. They advanced through the ruins, every step feeling heavier than the last. Zeltur's grip on his rifle was so tight that his fingers ached, but he could not let go. His mind screamed at him to run, to escape this nightmare. But where would he go? The dropships were kilometers away, and they had lost contact with the main fleet. The humans had jammed their communications, cutting them off from any hope of reinforcement. It was a tactic the Valkyrie themselves had used countless times before, and now they were on the receiving end of it. A flicker of movement. Zeltur spun, raising his weapon, but nothing was there. His heart pounded, his breaths short and uneven. "Did you see that?" he whispered, but his comrades only looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Or maybe a scream. A real, gut-wrenching scream from somewhere behind them. Zeltur turned just in time to see one of their own vanish into the darkness, his body yanked away so quickly that there wasn't even time for a second cry. The Valkyrie warriors fired wildly in all directions, their energy blasts lighting up the ruins in flashes of green. But they were shooting at shadows. The humans were nowhere to be seen. Kvorn grabbed Zeltur by the arm, his voice trembling. "We need to move. Now." They sprinted forward, abandoning any attempt at stealth. The ruins stretched ahead like a maze, each turn leading them deeper into the unknown. Their breathing was loud, too loud. It felt like a beacon, announcing their presence to the silent predators lurking in the darkness. Another warrior screamed. Zeltur didn't look back this time. He already knew what he would see. Nothing. Just empty air where a soldier had stood moments before. The realization sank in like ice in his veins. They were being played with. The humans were not just killing them. They were breaking them. A sudden sound from above. Zeltur barely had time to react before something dropped from the ceiling, landing on the soldier beside him. A human. Smaller than the towering Valkyrie, but faster, deadlier. Before the soldier could even aim his weapon, the human had driven a blade into his throat, silencing him instantly. Zeltor fired, but the human was already gone, vanishing into the shadows like a phantom. He stumbled backward, his breathing ragged. Kavorn was muttering something under his breath. A prayer, maybe. A desperate plea to the gods of war. But there were no gods here, only death. The last 3 remaining warriors ran, their discipline shattered. All they wanted was to escape, to get away from these creatures that hunted them with an unnatural precision. Zeltor's mind raced. How had this happened? How had a species they had underestimated so completely turned the hunt against them? Then it hit him. Humans had spent their entire existence surviving against predators. Their world was filled with dangers, forcing them to adapt, to evolve. And when they encountered a new threat, they didn't run. They learned. They changed. And then they hunted. Zeltor's legs burned as he ran, his mind screaming for an escape route. The extraction point was close. If they could just reach it, a sudden impact. Something hit him hard from the side, knocking him to the ground. He rolled, trying to bring up his weapon, but it was too late. A knee pressed into his chest, a blade at his throat. His vision cleared, and he finally saw the human clearly. Cold, calculating eyes stared down at him. There was no rage, no hatred, just the quiet understanding of a predator that had caught its prey. Zeltor tried to speak, to beg, but the human said nothing. They never did. Kavorn was still running, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. He could see the extraction beacon up ahead, blinking like a promise of salvation. He pushed himself harder, ignoring the pain, the exhaustion, the fear. Just a few more steps, just a little farther. But then, nothing. Silence. His legs buckled, his vision blurred. He looked down, confused. A blade protruded from his chest. He tried to breathe, but the air wouldn't come. He collapsed forward, the last thing he saw being the darkened silhouette of a human standing over him, already moving on to the next hunt. The ruins fell silent once more. The battle was over. The Valkyrie had come as predators, but they had learned the truth too late. They were never the hunters. They had always been the prey. The Valkyrie fleet hovered above the ruined human colony, their warships casting massive shadows over the surface. The remnants of their once proud hunting party had sent desperate distress signals before their voices were silenced. Now, a full battalion of warriors had landed, armed to the teeth, determined to reclaim their honor and wipe out whatever had killed their brethren. They expected resistance. They expected a fight. What they did not expect was silence. No human corpses, no traces of battle, only the shattered remains of their own kind. The warriors moved in formation, their eyes scanning every shadow, their claws gripping their weapons tightly. The air was thick with tension, and though none of them spoke it aloud, they all felt it. Something was wrong. General Vorkan led the charge, his heavy steps echoing through the ruined streets. He had fought in countless battles, slaughtered entire species, and never once felt the sting of fear. But now, standing in the eerie quiet, his instincts screamed at him. He clenched his jaw, forcing the feeling down. This was human trickery, nothing more. Advance in a line. Secure the perimeter, he barked, his voice breaking the silence like a thunderclap. The Valkyrie warriors spread out, scanning the crumbling buildings, their weapons trained on every possible hiding place. But nothing moved. No attack came. The streets were empty. And yet, they were being watched. Zeltor, one of the few survivors of the first landing party, walked among them, his wounds hastily bandaged, his mind still haunted by what he had seen. He had tried to explain, tried to warn them, but no one had listened. The Valkyrie were the apex predators, the galaxy's deadliest hunters. Fear was not in their nature. But the humans had changed that. They had learned what true predators were. And now, they were walking into a trap they could not see. Zeltor's breathing was unsteady as his eyes darted around. The humans were here. He knew it. But where? A sound. A faint click, barely audible, but enough to send a shiver down his spine. Then another, and another. The Valkyrie soldiers tensed, their weapons raised, but there was nothing to shoot at. Zeltor felt his stomach drop. It was too late. The trap was already set. A sudden explosion shattered the silence. A massive fireball erupted from a nearby building, sending debris and shrapnel flying. The shockwave threw warriors off their feet, some crashing into walls, others torn apart instantly. Screams filled the air as more explosions followed, one after another, detonating in perfect sequence. The entire city was rigged. Panic set in. The disciplined formation crumbled as Valkyrie warriors scattered, desperate to escape the inferno consuming them. Some fired blindly into the shadows, but their weapons hit nothing. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Zeltor stumbled, coughing through the thick smoke, his mind racing. The humans had planned this. They had led them here, let them walk willingly into their own graves. But how? How could prey outthink the hunters? He forced himself forward, pushing past the wreckage of his fallen comrades, his only thought now survival. General Vorkan roared, his voice filled with fury. Regroup. Find cover. They will not defeat us. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. The humans had already won. The explosions were only the beginning. As the flames lit up the ruins, dark shapes began to emerge from the shadows. Not Valkyrie. Humans. They moved like ghosts, quick, silent, blending with the smoke. Their weapons had no flash, no warning. The first shots rang out, precise, deadly. Valkyrie warriors dropped before they even realized they were under attack. Those who tried to fight back found themselves shooting at empty air. The humans never stayed in one place long enough to be targeted. They struck, vanished, and struck again. Zeltor dove behind a fallen pillar, his heart pounding. His hands trembled as he tried to reload his weapon, his fingers slick with sweat. He had never felt this before, this raw, paralyzing terror. A Valkyrie warrior was not supposed to feel fear. They were the ones who caused it. And yet here he was, shaking, his every instinct screaming at him to run. A shadow moved nearby. He turned, raising his weapon, but before he could fire, the human was on him. A blade flashed, slicing cleanly across his arm, forcing him to drop his rifle. He barely had time to react before a boot slammed into his chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The human loomed over him, their expression calm, almost uninterested, as if Zeltor was nothing more than an insect beneath their foot. Vorkan roared in defiance, charging toward the nearest human, his massive frame ready to crush them. But the human didn't move. They waited. Just as he swung his weapon, another human appeared from behind, striking with a speed he couldn't match. Pain exploded in his side as a knife was driven between his armor plates, twisted, then ripped out. He stumbled, his vision blurring. His pride had blinded him. He had thought this was a battle, but it wasn't. It was a hunt, and they were the prey. The last of the Valkyrie warriors tried to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The humans had sealed the exits, boxed them in like animals to be slaughtered. The once mighty hunters of the galaxy were reduced to terrified creatures, scrambling for survival. The humans watched them with cold efficiency. No cruelty, no gloating, just the quiet precision of predators finishing their hunt. One by one, the Valkyrie fell. No speeches, no mercy, only silence. Zeltor lay on the ground, his breath shallow, his body numb. He watched as the last of his kind were cut down, the humans moving through the battlefield without emotion. It was over. The Valkyrie had lost. Not just the battle, but something far greater. They had lost their place at the top of the food chain. The galaxy had changed, and for the first time in his life, Zeltor understood what it truly meant to be hunted. The Valkyrie fleet drifted in the void, broken and scattered. The once mighty warships, which had blackened the skies of conquered worlds, now lay in ruins, their hulls scared and lifeless. Only a few vessels had survived the massacre. Inside the flagship Bornak's Wrath, the atmosphere was suffocating, thick with tension and the scent of burning circuitry. The ship's command deck, once a place of strategic precision and dominance, now resembled a graveyard of shattered screens and flickering emergency lights. Zeltor sat hunched against a console, his body covered in wounds that refused to stop bleeding. His mind was a storm of fear and disbelief. They had underestimated the humans. No, they had misunderstood them entirely. The Valkyrie had seen them as prey, a weak species ripe for conquest. But the truth had struck them like a blade to the heart. The humans were predators, patient and merciless, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They had turned the Valkyrie's own arrogance against them, leading them into a carefully planned massacre. Zeltor had seen the death of his warriors, the fall of his people's pride. And now there was only one thing left to do: warn the others before it was too late. General Vorkan, his massive frame hunched over a damaged console, wiped the blood from his face. He had never known defeat. He had never known fear. But now his hands trembled. He turned to the remaining officers, their eyes wide with shock, their bodies tense with barely contained panic. "We must send a message to the High Command," he growled, forcing strength into his voice. "The humans, they are not what we thought. If we do not warn the Empire, the Valkyrie will fall." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. No one argued. No one dared. A technician, his hands shaking, activated the emergency communication systems. Static crackled through the speakers, the signal weak, barely holding. The humans had done something, scrambled their frequencies, jammed their transmissions. But they had to break through. They had to send the warning. Zeltor watched as the technician struggled, sweat dripping down his brow. The humans had planned everything, but they could not silence the truth. The galaxy had to know. The moment the transmission stabilized, Vorkan stepped forward, his voice heavy with the weight of defeat. "This is General Vorkan of the Valkyrie Dominion," he began, his tone hollow. "To all Valkyrie forces, to the High Command, heed my words. The humans, they are not prey. They are predators of the highest order. We walked into their trap, believing ourselves superior. And now, we are the hunted. Our warriors are dead. Our fleet is shattered. We underestimated them. And now, the cost is our survival." Silence followed his words. The transmission remained open, but no immediate response came. The Empire had never received a message like this before. The Valkyrie had conquered world after world, faced countless species, and always emerged victorious. Fear was a concept unknown to them. And yet, here was one of their greatest generals, his voice lined with terror. Zeltor's breathing was ragged as he stared at the flickering screen. He could see the raw horror in Vorkan's expression, the way his hands clenched into fists as if trying to hold on to the last remnants of their old pride. But there was no pride left, only survival. A warning was not enough. They needed proof. Zeltor forced himself to stand, his body screaming in protest. "Send them the battle logs," he said, his voice hoarse. "Show them what happened. Let them see." The technician hesitated, his claws hovering over the controls. The battle logs were damning. They would reveal everything: the traps, the ambush, the way the humans had wiped out entire squads without ever being seen. The Empire would see their warriors running, breaking formation, losing control. They would see the fear that had never existed in Valkyrie history. But there was no choice. The technician gave a shaky nod and initiated the transfer. Data streamed through the transmission, a silent confession of their defeat. Vorkan exhaled sharply, his gaze dropping to the floor. He had never thought he would live to see this day, the day the Valkyrie learned fear. But even as the transmission sent their warning across the stars, something inside him twisted with unease. The humans had let them escape. Not all of them. Most had been hunted down, slaughtered in the ruins of their own overconfidence, but some had been allowed to flee. That was no accident. That was a message. Zeltor clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. They wanted us to send this message, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The room fell silent. The remaining warriors looked at him, confusion flashing in their eyes. They didn't stop us from escaping. They didn't stop us from sending the warning. Why? His mind raced, piecing together the horrifying realization. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were sending a message of their own. Vorkan's breath caught in his throat. Zeltor was right. The humans could have wiped them out completely. They had control over the battlefield, over every movement the Valkyrie made. And yet, they had left survivors. Not out of mercy. No, this was something far worse. A demonstration. A lesson. A warning. The screen flickered as the transmission continued. Then, suddenly, something changed. A new signal. A response. But not from the Valkyrie High Command. The message was simple. A single sentence appearing across the screen, written in the harsh, unforgiving language of the humans. We are watching. The air in the command deck turned to ice. Every warrior who saw the words felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into their bones. It was not anger. It was not vengeance. It was fear. The humans had let them go because they wanted the Valkyrie to know they were being watched, that they were not safe, that no matter where they ran, the humans would always be one step ahead. The transmission cut out. The silence that followed was deafening. Vorkan's fists shook, his body trembling with rage, with humiliation, but most of all, with something he had never felt before, powerlessness. Zeltor closed his eyes, his mind screaming for a way out, for some answer that would undo what had been done. But there was none. The humans had made their move. And now, the entire galaxy would feel their presence. The warning had been sent, but it was already too late.